So the idea was, how do you sum up Earth's culture into this thing that you're sending out into space? It's like, what things would you define make up the entire human experience across the board? Because every country, everybody lives so differently and there's different languages, but what is the core to the human experience? So that really is what inspired the Generation Starship. It's the idea that how do you pack all of Earth's culture into a starship and you send it out in space to go somewhere new?
This is the future.
Hello and welcome to the Alternate Futures podcast, where we chat with indie sci-fi creators about their work, the world, and anything in between or beyond. Today I'm here with Mori Grant. Creator of the Lucia Expedition series, Mori is an author and amateur astronomer. Mori Grant is a pen name based on the Latin phrase memento mori. Mori lives in a small town in California and has been writing novels since she was a young girl. Mori, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I got to ask something. I have to ask this because I'm very curious, I didn't read it out there because I did ask you before this. But you have in one of your bios an IntJ content creator. Now that's the psychological profile of the, what is it, Myers-Briggs, I think it is, or something like that.
That's it,
Um,
Myers-Briggs personality test. Yeah.
yeah. Now I'm actually at IntJP, I call it, because I'm like 50-50 on the last one. But what does that even mean to be a IntJ content creator?
So INTJ to me is a marker, well, to everyone, it's a marker of personality. There's 16 personality types according to Myers-Briggs. But for me, when I started creating content, it was kind of me looking out into the Instagram universe, trying to find people that I could relate to. As an INTJ, INTJs are more of a rarer personality type, and especially as women, they're even more rare. So it can be not very common that you encounter someone else who kind of thinks like you or like might analyze the world in the ways that INTJs do. So when I started creating content on Instagram, I was just looking for people like me. So I was searching for like minds. What I would do is I would post quotes that fit the INTJ personality type and also do deeper dive analysis into INTJ and what it means and kind of how we analyze the world. To that, I found a lot of people like me. I ended up with like 4,000 followers by the time that I ended it. But it was really about kind of soul searching and understanding myself. I've kind of always been the kid that doesn't always fit in. So just with the MBTI personality type, I kind of felt like I could learn about myself and understand myself. And that was my beacon to find other people who are also having issues understanding themselves and kind of unite us in a community, a place where we can all like rally around things that we enjoy and the ways that we talk and we think. So that's what it was for me. I really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, I did have to end it because I decided to pursue my writing more full time.
All right.
But I did enjoy it while I had it.
You amassed quite a good number of people there, 4,000. Did that translate over into people who stayed with you when you turned it over to being an author?
It did. About 300 jumped over, which was very exciting. And I made a lot of really good friends there. I have some of the best friends I've ever made. I never really thought that, I'm not a huge online person or online presence, but through that account, I made some of the best friends I've ever had. And a lot of them are writers. So I not only built my friend database, but I also built my writer community.
Would you happen to know what the most popular or not most popular, most common personality type for women is then?
I do not know. I only know
No.
the rare ones because I'm
Okay.
INTJ and my twin sister's INFJ, and we're both the rarer types. So that's all I
Okay.
know.
I didn't check it up, so this wasn't a test or anything. I was just curious. Um, so you
Now I'm
also,
curious too.
yeah, yeah, we'll check it up after this. Yeah. You mentioned you're an amateur astronomer. So how old were you when you got started in that, and what sort of some interesting things you've observed?
I've always loved space. I grew up just thinking about space and admiring the planets. Those were always my favorite subjects in school. When I went to college, I actually had a chance to do some astronomy research, and I would say that's where my amateur astronomy life began. They had a giant observatory there on the campus. And at the time that I arrived, when I was a freshman, there weren't anyone doing any research on it. They just had it there. And then they had some public viewing days one day out of every month where the public could come view Saturn, or they would, point it at something really cool. So I basically begged my professor to let me do research on it, and I actually got a key to it, which is really cool. And if you go inside, it's got the control room at the bottom, and then you can go up to the top near the telescope. But at the bottom area, it looks a lot like, I don't know, Star Trek, where you would have all the different monitors and things configured up there, and like cool lighting on the walls and globes everywhere, and like things of the moon. And I just really loved it. I loved my time there. The star system that we studied was called Geminorum. It's a variable star system that basically it's two stars that are orbiting each other out in space. And they're like these massive stars, and they complete a complete orbital rotation in 4 hours and 11
Oh, wow.
minutes.
Huh.
And I just thought that was really, really cool. And what I would do is I would go there late at night. Of course, you can only view it when it's dark. So you go there around 10 p.m. and you set up your camera on the telescope, and then you wait and you snap pictures of it. Like you don't have to do it manually, you set it automatically. But it's snapping pictures overnight for about 5 hours to capture that full rotation. And then you kind of analyze the light curve, and you learn some orbital dynamics and other things about the system. But I would say that's what really got me started into my love of astronomy. And ever since then, I've kind of been, I say very amateur because I don't even have a telescope right now, but I look at the stars a lot, and I think that that counts.
Right. Did any of that I mean, we'll get to your book Deadliner in a little bit, but did any of that inspire settings or directions for the story at all?
Certainly it did. I used to teach at the Girl Scouts. I taught a STEM center and makerspace, so I would run these workshops for the girls. One of the workshops I ran was about the Golden Record, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but it was something that NASA sent out in 1977. It was this phonograph record that they put on their Voyager 1 and 2. The Voyager 1 and 2 were going out to study the outer planets of the solar system, and then they were going to kind of keep going on to deep space. And NASA's idea was that they wanted to put something on it where if it encountered an intelligent species out into deep space, they could understand Earth just by looking at this thing. And so they decided to put sounds on it, and the sounds are like nature sounds or like some musical selections from the past, different eras, different cultures. And it's got some pictures on the cover that will help an intelligent species understand how to play the record, and also information about Earth, like Earth's location and stuff. And that workshop that I ran was for the girls to invent their own golden record. So the idea was, how do you sum up Earth's culture into this thing that you're sending out into space? It's like, what things would you define make up the entire human experience across the board? Because every country, everybody lives so differently, and there's different languages, but what is the core to the human experience was the idea. And
Hmm.
so I kind of took that idea from that workshop that I made and translated it into a book. So that really is what inspired the Generation Starship that's in the book that I wrote, which we'll talk about later. But it's the idea that how do you pack all of Earth's culture into a starship and you send it out in space to go somewhere new? So it's
Right.
inspired me a lot. That's where I got the idea for the series I'm working on now.
Oh, excellent. Um, uh, have you ever, so I was aware of the gold disc, but I'm curious, have you ever had the misfortune of watching the movie or of reading the book L. Ron Hubbard's Battlefield Earth?
I have not.
Okay, so the basis for that is set around the golden disk. But it's interesting because scientists will look at it in your perspective, as you said, right? And we'll say, okay, we're planning out how do we communicate with another race, alien race, extraterrestrial race? What can we put on the disk that can guide them to understand us? And uh, and then we case it in gold because gold will survive, right? It's very useful. And what he said in the story was, the aliens who found it, didn't care about what was written on it. They just noticed that it was covered in gold, which was a rare mineral for them. And so they came to Earth and wiped out 99% of the humans.
Like, maybe we don't want to tell everyone our address.
Yeah. No,
Stranger
exactly.
danger.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because the nice instructions going right to Earth and everything. So yeah,
Time
so
stamped and everything.
that was interesting. Yeah. And
That is
especially
very
because
interesting.
you have a cybersecurity background as well. So you should be particularly conscious of this stuff.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying it's a good idea.
Yeah. So yeah, you are not the first cybersecurity person I've had on this show. So what was your sort of path through cybersecurity to becoming an author then?
Well, the other ones you've had on your show are probably much more cyber savvy than I am. I
Well, I had
actually
one guy,
cybersecurity.
sorry, I had one guy who started as a paramedic. So
Oh,
that's an
okay. Well,
interesting,
that's
there you go.
that's interesting. I started as a teacher. Well, let's see. I majored in physics. And then I started as a teacher at a STEM center, Makerspace, like I said, with the Girl Scouts. And that was really fun because I got to put some of my STEM skills to use and taught some physics workshops and things like that. After that, I decided I wanted to travel the world and get paid for it. So I became an expat in Korea and I taught English for 2.5 years. While I was working there, I decided I wanted to go into something a little bit more intellectually challenging. I wanted a field that was always changing and that you'd have to keep up with and keep learning. I'm someone who really likes to learn, so I wanted something that was really challenging. Not that teaching wasn't, just when I moved back home, I wanted a good career that I was going to have to keep learning in. So I started looking into cybersecurity. I had always found it interesting. I thought it would be really cool to be like an ethical hacker. I don't know if you've heard of that.
The white
I just thought that
hackers.
sounded
Yeah.
like so cool. So I was looking into that when I got back. I got lucky enough to land my first cybersecurity role, and it's local government, so I get to wear a lot of hats since it's a smaller city that I work for. And I've been working there for almost 2 years now, and I absolutely love it.
Oh, that's great. It might interest you to know you're also not the first ex-Korean expat, let's say, or expat to visit Korea that I've had on the show either. So,
Really? That's
yeah, I've got
really cool.
some interesting, yeah, some interesting. So, what was your experience like in Korea?
It was wonderful. I love the culture there. Not that I don't love America, but Korean is very much more fitting to my personality. It's an introverted communal culture, so you have people who kind of help each other a lot. Like people in America are friendly and we help each other too, but in Korea it's like more like you don't drop your trash on the ground because it's not respectful of others, so there's this respect to the culture there that I really admire. And when you're going in public transportation and things, people keep to themselves because of that introvert or private and respectful values of their culture where they don't want to disrupt other people's time. So they're kind of keeping to themselves. I really like that too because I'm a bit of a quiet person. So I can just go be quiet and fit in. I loved it there. I loved the food. The transportation's very nice. Where I live right now, I'm out in the sticks in Northern California. So we don't really have a lot of buses or trains or anything. But there I could just take a few steps and hop on the bullet train and go to Busan. So I loved it there. Yeah, it was very nice.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's somewhere that I want to visit. My wife and I are looking. She got into K-dramas for a while, really big.
Oh,
So
did she?
yeah. So
Just mostly the shows or some of the movies too.
mostly it was mostly the shows. She's a doctor, and for some reason she still likes watching doctor shows. So she got into a lot of the doctor shows, but also some lawyer ones as well.
There's some
A
good
lot of the
ones.
K-dramas.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fun.
Yeah. So it's on our bucket list for sure. We'll see. Given the way the world's going, I'm not sure if we'll get there, but we'll try.
Mm.
Um, your pen name is you say is based on Memento Mori. The name that's the name for the novel, is it? I had to look this one up, so I'm not like some kind of wonder guy about the historical novels. Or but is that the way you came up with the basis for the name, or?
It is, yeah. Memento Mori. So I actually just stumbled across the phrase on Instagram. I follow a few Latin pages because I'm just always been curious about Latin. I'm terrible at learning languages, and my good friend, she's a Swedish friend of mine that I met on my INTJ page. She'll tell me, "Oh, it just takes dedication and it's how much work you put into it." But I'm telling you, no matter how much work I put into it, I can't catch a language to save my life. But I try to learn Latin, or at least I'll say I'd admire it. But I was following a Latin page and they had some gravestones with Memento Mori written across an explanation below of it, meaning remember the dead, basically, or it could be translated as remember we must die or remember death in general. And to me, that more means to remember to live, because if you have to die, you should live your
Mm,
life first. So to me, it's not really a dreadful or a sad phrase, even though it's on gravestones. To me, it's more of a happy phrase or an inspirational phrase to kind of grasp life to the fullest. So that's why I chose Maury as the first name. Memento didn't really work great for a first name, so Maury
right.
worked better. And then Grant for the last name is one my twin sister came up with. She just said it went well with it, so I went with it. I
All right.
trusted her opinion.
Excellent. Have you read the novel then?
I have
By
not
the same
actually. I didn't
name.
even know it
Okay.
was a novel, so I
Okay.
feel
No,
bad
I
about
looked
that.
that up because I was curious. Yeah. I think you'll find it interesting. I haven't read the novel, but I read the blurb, and yeah, you might want to look into that.
You have to look into that. Is it written in English?
I think it's in English, yeah, and it
Sweet.
is. It has actually, interestingly, some in a general way, some similarities with the concepts, let's say, surrounding your book as well, which is interesting.
Oh, that's very
Not
interesting.
specifically the. I don't want to get spoilers. That's why it's always tricky in that. But it's very generally. You can imagine Remember the Dead, so it actually deals with elderly
Hmm.
people more, but similar ideas in some ways.
I'm definitely gonna
Without
have to check
giving
that
more.
out.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued now.
It is an older novel apparently, but
That's
yeah,
okay.
no,
I
it's
like
interesting.
classics.
So I'm curious, so teacher, cybersecurity, Instagram, J creator, what was the sort of switch that flicked that made you say, okay, I'm gonna write a science fiction series?
I've been writing since I was a little girl. I've just always loved stories. I'll chalk that up to my love of Lord of the Rings. I grew up reading the greats, Lord of the Rings. I read the books. I read a lot of the longer length fantasy novels when I was younger. So like Harry Potter, I was reading in like first and second grade. So my reading level was always higher than my grade
Thanks for
level.
making
I
me feel
read.
old there.
Oh, no. I also like the Thornbirds and like the classics too, Wuthering Heights and all those. But when I was reading these stories when I was younger, I think that's what taught me about storytelling and the joy of storytelling. And I related to a lot of the characters, and I just thought imaginary worlds were like the coolest thing. And like I've said a few times, I have a twin sister, and she also loves stories. So when we were 5, we would like write on little notebooks like these awful stories about like these, they're not good at all. But like I think my first story was about a hamster that was in its cage in a room, and it escaped out through the window, and it ran across the street, and that was the end of the story. So and then we would trade our books and like read them to each other. So I've been writing my whole life. I took a brief break in college just because, college you're doing a lot of things and you get a little overwhelmed. But after college, I started writing again, and I decided to publish this series because my twin sister read it and told me it was the first one that was publishable. So
Okay. So you ran with it right away.
yeah, so I ran with it right away. Took her word for it.
Excellent. Um, so well, I guess how did you find the experience? And like, do you have a daily schedule you set up, or did you sort of just blast it through on sort of that creative energy? How did you find that experience?
I do. I love it. I love writing. It's my absolute passion. So like yesterday I was writing for 8 hours. I can write all day. If I didn't have a main job, I worry that I'd be chained to my computer all day writing. So I just love it. Creativity is something that comes pretty naturally to me, and same with imagination and the energy for it, since it is my passion. So I don't necessarily put a time aside for it, but when I do have time, that's what I find myself doing.
And this one is, well, first of all, it's quite long. I was reading it rather leisurely last week, and then once I realized how long it was, I'm like, oh my God, I better hurry up because I won't get this finished in time. Did you have any thoughts on trying to pare it down to, let's say, a more standard length, or you just said that's the story, it's going to be published that way?
It's funny you mentioned that. I'm actually cutting it down right now. That's what I was working on yesterday. When I wrote it, I finished it about 3 years ago. And, you always develop your writing style and you continue to grow as you move on. And as I've written more books in the series, I've come to refine my writing style. And so I can go back and look at the first book in the series and see areas where it's mostly my description. I'm just a little bit wordy sometimes. So I am gonna cut it down a bit and I'll be publishing the shorter version in place of that longer version soon.
Okay, excellent. And it is self-published, is that right?
That's correct.
Did you try to go traditional, or did you say, no, I'm not waiting those long years till I find out anything?
Yeah, I was really eager just to hold this one in my hands as a paper version. It was the first one that I really put a bow on top and was really satisfied with the way that the story went. I was really involved with the characters, and I thought it had a lot of good themes that I could relate to in it. So I was kind of eager to get that one out and just see how it did. I wanted to kind of gauge my writing style, gauge the engagement from readers, and gauge what kind of target audience it would fit. But I can't say that's going to be the case forever. My sister, like I've mentioned a million times, she's been sending it to literary agents for me, and there's a few that have told me if I can cut down the length, they might be interested in taking it. So
Hmm.
who knows, it might be traditionally published one of these days. And if not, then I'm just very excited to have something that I am releasing.
Excellent. Yeah, it's always weighing up well, I was going to ask you about the main part of going that direction, which is the marketing and promotion, isn't it? Um,
Yeah.
how has that gone? And is that something you're hoping one of these companies might take over then?
Oh yeah, totally. I have an Instagram account that I run that's, in my opinion, fairly successful, meaning that I have more than one follower. Since it's the first book I've ever released, I'm happy if anybody reads it. But because I did have that INTJ page account, found a lot of my target audience there because INTJs are generally the type of people who will really like the novel. It has a lot of those deeper themes and explorations of the world and the human condition at its most intense. So I was able to connect a lot with my target audience there. So a lot of them read the book and let me know that they liked it, which was always a fun thing. And then, like I said, the ones that jumped over have read it. So that's always very exciting. So I was able to connect with a lot of them there. Now that I'm pouring myself more into my writing, I've been doing some ads and things like that on Instagram, which has connected with me with potential readers as well, which is good. But it does take time, as you said, and it can take like some fine tuning with the ads and the type of content that you're posting to figure out exactly how to reach your target audience. So it does take time, but it's going decently. Like I said, I'm just excited when somebody reads it, so I'm not asking for much.
Excellent. Yeah. And you have now the second book out. And with your writing pace, well, how many are you aiming for the series?
I'm aiming for four, and my writing pace is greatly increasing. The first one took me about 3.5 years from start to finish, including cover design and everything like that. The second one took me a year and a half, and the third one I'm almost already finished with, and I've been writing it about 5 months. So I am getting faster, which is good.
Excellent. You mentioned cover design, and I was as I was coming, it was probably about yeah, probably about 80% through, I think. And there was an image with let's say a non-human that we'll get to with a large weapon that made me think if you're ever aiming for certain audiences, that would be a one to put on the cover.
Yeah,
I could just see
certainly,
that character standing there with his giant weapon. I won't say too much
certainly.
more, but yeah.
Oh, it was very tempting not to do that. Actually, I did have a mock cover with that character, and I also had a mock cover with that character's smaller companion, and I really, really liked it. But then I was told that they weren't the main characters, so I probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I love it.
Well, they're big characters in it. They're not the main characters, but they
Um,
do have a fairly
They're
significant role,
influential.
don't
That's
they?
a good way
Yeah.
to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, then, so your book is the Lucia Expedition, and the first book is called Deadliner. I don't want not plural. Um, and it features a lot of interesting things that I would like to talk about. I wonder if you could give a brief summary. It usually helps uh, introduce the listeners to it and stops me from doing too many spoilers.
Sure, you're counting on me not giving away spoilers. Here we go.
It's your book, so you can get away with it.
That's true. Okay, so basically, Deadliner takes place on a Generation starship headed for a new planet. A Generation starship, you can think of it in a way of it's being a floating city that's moving through space, and people kind of continue their lives naturally. So, in a lot of space movies or things like that, you might have people doing warp speed or cryo sleep or something where they freeze for the journey. But Generation starship, you're basically just going to pass down your familial line until the landing day. So they're moving on a Generation starship. They're headed for a new planet because something happened to Earth. We're not sure what happened, but humans can't live on Earth anymore. So they're sending this last remnant of humanity out to this new planet where they can hopefully survive. The ship is massive, but unfortunately, the population is dwindling. But the ship is their home, and the ship's name is Lucia. since the ship is where they're born and raised, they come to think of the ship more as a god than a ship itself. So they begin to obey its laws because if they don't, there's a strict punishment. Basically, the ship will kick you off the ship if you don't obey it, and nobody wants to get kicked into space, so you're going to obey the ship. But it has all these laws and regulations that are supposed to sustain life until the landing. But unfortunately, as centuries have passed, those regulations have become skewed. So they become too strict and too tight on the population. So the population is declining as a result. But the society of the survivors are too afraid to question the ship because it's also the thing that's giving them life. So they're kind of trapped. It's this thing that they kind of worship and it brings them life and it's their home and they think everything of it. But at the same time, it's leading to their downfall and they might not survive till the landing because of it. In the midst of this very strict society world, there's two outcasts named Lune and Solace. They start to question the ship and the strict society that they find themselves in. Pretty early on in the book, they start to uncover some of the terrible truths about Lucia's programming and laws, and they realize that if society follows her rules, they actually might go extinct before the landing. And they realize the only true path to survival is to disobey the ship and go against the traditions that people have lived by for centuries. But unfortunately, it's a slow turning ship, pun intended, and Lune and Solace must find a way to convince their community that their god is actually a reaper, and they must defy it if they want to survive.
That's an excellent summary.
Thank you.
Wow.
I worked on that one.
Yeah. So you do have very broadly three themes that I really, really want to discuss. And the first is, of course, generation ships. Now you mentioned a little bit of why, sort of how you got inspired with that, but maybe you could just sort of summarize again, like what was it that drew you to generation ships versus, as you said, like the warp drive and the hyperspace and everything? Obviously, there's significant differences, and generation ships do present themselves as vehicles for a lot of interesting discussion.
Absolutely. Sure. So basically, I like the idea of the passage of time and how the passage of time can affect a culture. And I like the idea that the creator of the ship thought that she could preserve Earth's culture exactly as it was by putting a select population on the ship and training them in the ways of Earth and making the ship simulate Earth's experiences, and that they could basically just time warp to the planet and they would be able to preserve that culture. I like the idea that with that passage of time, though, especially over centuries, you're going to have the ship, the people who live on the ship, create their own culture, and they're going to learn of Lucia, the ship, as their Earth, opposed to really being able to date and understand what it was like to live on a planet. So basically, to me, what was appealing was that passage of time, the formation of the own culture, and potentially an unspoken religion around the ship, an understanding of the Earth, the ship's creator, because it is basically their savior, and they understand that. So they're going to lean more into that identity than they do have that identity with Earth as they were supposed to. So it's that idea that I kind of wrap my head around and liked, because if they were just to jump from place to place, they wouldn't have that passage of time and that culture formation.
Right. And it was, I believe this isn't a spoiler. So it was a 700-year journey.
Yes.
And also in the beginning of the book, there's a kind of cutaway view of the ship, which shows it as having two sides. Now maybe you can explain your thinking on that.
Sure. So Adonia is the name of the creator of the ship, and she's a scientist, and scientists like to have fail-safes and backup options and redundancy and resiliency. So this is her idea to make her ship and her experiment as resilient as possible. So this isn't a spoiler, this is said pretty early on in the book that this ship is the only refuge for humanity. There is no other option. Everyone else on Earth is going to die. So they need to make sure that this thing is going to preserve humanity and it's going to make it to its destination. So Adonia's idea was to not only include one population on the ship, but technically include two. So she divides the ship in half. There's a left side and a right side of the ship. And her idea is that if there was a bad technology outage or a bad virus or a killing spree or some disaster on one side of the ship that completely annihilated a population, she would still have that backup redundancy of the other side of the ship that would make it. So these two sides of the ship, in order to make sure that's a 100% fail-safe, aren't allowed to communicate with each other in any intellectual way in case they share some bad secrets or like they share some bad plotting or plans to extinct everyone. Something like that her idea was just completely two different ships basically, but within the same vessel. So that's the idea is redundancy.
Right. I always wondered, because 700 years is a long time, right? And I guess you can imagine it in kind of three phases, which I'm not sure. I think you might have alluded to in the story, but I'm not sure. I mean, obviously there's the starting phase, which could be a couple generations. Then there's the long middle phase, and then the approach phase, landing phase, whatever that is. Um, to be honest, after 700 years, I'm quite surprised that they haven't sort of devolved into feudalism or anarchy or something like that. Do you think, are you hopeful enough that society would stay? I mean, the society stayed quite civil. Do you see that as the structure of the ship and the rules that were in place? And do you think that the rules, if we were to build a generation ship, would we have to have like really serious rules? Like this is basically capital punishment, as you described it. You make a mistake and boom, you're off the ship, right? Um,
Right.
do you think that's the only way we could have any chance of keeping? And would that still work, actually?
I wonder. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if we should try it or not and find out. I think like I won't give any spoilers away either. Who knows what happens on either side of the ship? You'll have to read the book. Perhaps some things are more orderly on one side of the ship than the other. We're not sure until you read the book. But especially with the left side where you do take place, this isn't much of a spoiler either because they're only down to 100 people. And 100 people are going to kind of band together and seek to tradition because traditionally on a ship like that, it's what's worked to survive. And tradition is to follow the ship's rules. So I do believe it's Lucia's strict guidelines and strict laws. It's so intense that any crime that in on Earth you might more likely be thrown into jail for, you're just going to get departed. You're just going to get thrown off the ship. So if you hurt someone, like if you attempted murder, whether you don't really have a lot of room for jury, there's not a jury, there's not a judge. Lucia, the ship, is judge, jury, and executioner. So if she thinks you tried to kill someone, she's just going to throw you off. So it's these crimes that people are too afraid to commit. It's going to try to establish the order, and that was Adonio's idea. I think that works on the left side when you pair it with what has happened to them individually as a population. I'm not going to give any spoilers away, but there are some historical events in their timeline that have made them very fearful of the ship, and they're very like trusting of the ship's strictness and rigorousness. So when the ship says she's rigorous, they're just going to trust it and they're not going to test it. I won't say it's like that everywhere, but for them on the left side, that is the case. In real life, if we were to build one, I think so, unless you did have better, like, if you had a human police force, whereas like Lucia has a robot police force and AI algorithm as the police force. If you had like a human police force or human community leaders, more like we have on Earth, you might be able to restore balance the orderly human society way. But just because the ship is based around that I think that strict laws would be necessary. But if this ever happens and people follow that, then I'm sorry I said that.
Because I was
Don't
wondering,
blame me.
I mean, many of our countries. So I'm a Canadian expat living in the UK, and you're in the US, and crime in most of our countries is going up these days as well. So maybe human police forces don't work all that well, but we could. I mean, I assume that you're not someone who's in favor of the death penalty or capital punishment necessarily. Maybe you are. Nothing wrong if you are. It's a debate to be had. But you can envision the Earth as a generation ship in some ways, right? Um,
Right.
and there are arguably entities trying to bring in AI control these days. But I imagine you would not be in favor of a death penalty to try and keep order, or would you? Do you think that's a realistic way of going about it?
Absolutely not. And I think that's a really good point you made. The book itself is meant to be a funhouse reflection of our society now. So you can look at what people value in terms of childbirth and leading on your, like leaving your legend behind. And a lot of societal pressures these days still have to do with that. Like, what about your legacy? Don't you want children? Don't you want to get married? Don't you want the same milestones as everybody else? So that, along with that technology aspect of like AI and AI control, it's all meant to be a funhouse mirror. So yes, if you read the book, you'll understand my personal opinion on that. I think that it's a dangerous game. I don't think that it can necessarily be trusted and it's proven not as ethical as we are. So no, I would not wish that on anyone.
Right. And I'm curious, so I think relatively early on we get so something you've done within the book, and I don't think this is a spoiler, is you've interjected chapters like between chapters with sort of, let's say, blog posts from people that have been involved in the project that were written before the launch of the ship. Um, and you have some of the advertising there at one point, to entice people on the ship. Now, for some people, that would be a utopian dream. Um, People who maybe aren't willing to look between the lines. Do you think that would entice lots of people to go in? And I don't know. I just feel like some of those things should be obvious that they can't work. I don't know what your perspective on that is.
No, I think
But
you're
but,
absolutely right.
but
I
yet
think
but yet millions of people did go onto the ship.
yeah, I think it's a two-parter because for one, I think that Earth is dying, so what choice do you have? Like this ship is the only option you have if you want your legacy to survive, if you don't want to die with everybody else. So people are desperate to get on. So that's one part of it. They're going to apply no matter what, probably. But the second part is Adonia, who's the creator of the ship, is trying to select a certain type of person. And so her application process is very rigorous. And part of this telling people, oh, it's utopia, it's safe, everyone that's there is going to be exactly like you. You don't have to worry about financial disparities. College is free. You can have any job that you want. All of this kind of utopian lifestyle she's trying to lure people in with and hopes that she can kind of offer it in some way, but ultimately it comes out to be more of a lie if you read the book. But this idea that she's luring people and she wants to understand people's true values and what kind of people are applying. So she's kind of trying to weed people out with this utopian mindset at the same time of pretending that she's offering it. So I think it's kind of tricky. It's like you kind of understand the mindset of the people who did want to board. They just wanted safety. I think it's something we can all relate to. Like, yes, we all want everyone to be safe. We want people to have food and water. We want a peaceful society. So it's alluring, certainly. But should you be suspicious of that? Absolutely.
Hmm. It's a weird set of people that she's decided to select for let's say, well, I think we can safely use colonizing another planet in this case in many of its definitions. Would like I just it's strange, like, because she's like on the surface at least she's selecting people who are more or less followers, and it's actually interesting
Mhm.
that you focus on the left side of the ship, and these are like leftist utopias, utopian ideals. I don't know if you did that on purpose or not, but
Good catch.
um, well, yeah. So I don't know. Again, spoiler territory, right? I don't want to get into it too much, but it seems like a weird set of people to select for that. I mean,
Mhm.
you've already hinted that there's more to this, so maybe I shouldn't go through there. But if you pick people who are looking for the safe, let's say easy road, are those going to be the people that you want to be like stuck on a planet way out in space somewhere trying to reproduce the human race?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, and I think how Adonia was thinking about it was survival of her ship, and this this isn't spoiler territory, I don't think, but her idea or her manifestation kind of stops once the ship lands. She's not too concerned with helping people beyond that point. Her mission was to deliver people. Her mission was the transportation. And to her, people who would successfully make it through 700 years would be followers because they would follow the rules. But you have such a good point there because if you have only followers, how are they going to make it in territory that's unknown? Or if they have everything, like their meals are made for them, they don't have to cook, they don't have to clean, they have a lot of luxury in that life, even though they do have difficulty. How are they going to learn to do things on their own once they step off the ship? So that's kind of the whole idea of it too, is she chose what she thought would work for the ship, but was it the right choice? We're not sure.
Right. And I guess that's a good time to segue into the sort of the second of the three themes or concepts I want to talk about, which is more or less motherhood in a way.
Mm.
Because Adonia then is, let's say, the mother of this ship. Basically, you can almost view the ship as an egg in some ways, and motherhood does feature a lot right from the first chapter. So I mean, I don't think it's a spoiler to suggest that death in childbirth is one of the big themes that runs throughout
Mhm.
the story. Now, I obviously don't have direct experience with motherhood. Um, but one thing that does interest me, and I've been thinking about a lot, is the concept of how are we going to reproduce in space? Now, in your particular case, you've got a generation ship which has some form of artificial gravity, and so
Mhm.
everything is in theory the same. But maybe I could just let you again put you on the spot for the non-spoiler part of describing the sort of that plot line or theme, let's say, that runs through the book without giving
Sure,
too
I
much away.
I'll try. Let's see. I think it's a widespread theme. If you think about it too, like Earth is the mother of the ship too, because it's the idea of passing down. So mothers not only create life, but they usually also raise children or raise you into who you become. And
So they
so it's kind
nurture
of
the
this
life, yeah.
pass. Yeah, exactly. So it's passing on who we are through the ages, through the generations, through ourselves, and how much of that original person or that original mother does carry down. So how much of Earth as the primary mother nature carries down all the way to Vegas. That's kind of an overarching theme. But if we're looking at it more specifically, I do think of this book as something that highlights some issues in our society. Like I said, it's a funhouse mirror. So in a society who's making sacrifices for the legacy. And that's the idea behind it. So if you're having all these future generations and it's on a generation starship and you're trying to reach the planet, you're going to build a success system around how many children you have, because that's the thing that's contributing to the mission and contributing to the future. So you're going to have a strict society that really pressures people to have children and to breed into that mission, and that comes with its own flaws and errors, but it also comes with the people who desire that life and want to like lead into that legacy. But it has to do with safety and sacrifice, and I'm trying not to give anything away here.
Right.
um but yes, motherhood is a big theme.
Well, it's interesting as well because, as you said, status, which goes against some of the advertising that was done, right? No wealth, like it's supposed to be equality. Sorry, I'll move
Hmm.
this. It's supposed to be equality, and yet, um, let's say one of the male characters feels his status and power because of the number of children he's fathered, right? And
Yeah. Hmm.
interestingly, an interesting corollary to that might be, especially considering that particular plot line, uh, why doesn't his wife have more status in a way, since she's the one who's mothered, well, should I give it away? She's the one who mothered a lot of kids, let's say. And
Absolutely.
and given the well, the issue with child mothers dying in childbirth, which is in the first chapter. In some ways, she should have a lot more status in this, even more than he does, because she would almost be like a holy grail in some ways.
Certainly. And I think she does have status, although it's not as explored in the book as it possibly could be. But her status is in a different realm than where Lune and Solus tread. So Lune and Solus are more treading on going against the ship's algorithms than dealing with society and trying to be within that world. But if you were to look at the world of the caregivers and the child raisers and that type of that avenue of society, you're going to see Galena, who's the wife of the character who has a lot of kids, have a lot more prominence. But because that's not the realm that Lune lives in, she doesn't get to see her as that idolized figure, as someone who has done what not a lot of people can do. So that's why it's seen more as him having the power, but that's because he controls the side of tradition in terms of law and in terms of being outside and like trying to control people, whereas she's more dealing with raising people and creating the next generation. So just two different sides of the mission, but Lune lies on the other one, which
Right.
is the main character of that book.
And you do have a discussion running throughout of let's say the nature of motherhood as well. So you did mention some of the characters. So Loon, the main character, and Galena, the prolific mother, shall we say? You named her intentionally. I'm assuming it sounds like mother hen type name.
Oh, no,
Maybe
I
not.
did
I don't
not, but
know.
that's kind of cool. No, I just thought it was a neat name. I
Okay.
I just liked it.
Um, and the other one was, I don't know how to pronounce her name. Zal, Zal,
Oh, it's
Zal,
Hall. Hmm.
Zal. Yeah. So those three present different perspectives on motherhood in a way, with Loon
Certainly.
being the one who really is sort of resisting everything. In fact, she goes on a rant at one point, and well, rant, I call it a rant, maybe,
It
um,
is a rant.
at one point, which is actually quite long too. So I was wondering if that comes from you at all, um, but that was a long discussion, let's say, on her own views on life regarding relationships and children. And then we have the other perspective. So it's interesting because it's not a one-sided discussion at all through the
Hmm.
story. You do have her perspective, and she is the main character, but you do have other perspectives saying, there's this bond between mothers and children that's very important. How's that going to play out? And this all plays also into the sort of tradition versus modernization um, battle that goes on through the story as well. So I find that quite interesting. I am curious if you fall on one of those sides, or whether this is sort of your own discussion on you're trying to work out where you fall based on this discussion.
I'm sympathetic to all sides. I think that, and that's one thing I was really careful with this book because I believe there's such an importance to tradition, but I also believe in innovation and that there's ways that we can do things better. So I won't say necessarily what side of the discussion I fall on, but I will say that I wanted them all to be represented in a way where they were sympathetic and understandable. Like Galena is really good at what she does, and she does have this dream, and she is great at it, and she does have a lot of advice to give to others, and she is this prolific mother character and very successful at it, and she loves her life. And then you have Zahal, who is has a different approach to motherhood and is a bit more closed off, but you still get a bit of a glimpse into that character. Then you have Loon, like I said, who's resisting, but Loon has that own issue with her own mother, which I won't go into. But they all have these different perspectives, and I just thought about this topic that I wanted to bring to light, which is maternal mortality in this book, and kind of wrap a story around that and put a Generation Starship bow on top and have people think about maternal mortality in a more critical way. And like, is it necessary? Or is there a way we can innovate where people can still have children and people can live to those traditional values, but we don't have to sacrifice people with that anymore? Or is that something we want to hold on to? Is tradition doesn't matter? Does the life of the baby within the womb matter with its connection? Like, where does that lie? I think it's a really interesting debate. I'm not on either side, but I wanted to present both sides where they were both like fully fleshed out.
Yeah, I think I'm get to that in just a moment because I do think that's an important and interesting discussion. Um, the characters all are quite single-minded, aren't they? Because they do see their perspective, and so you have Galena who's making lots of children and somehow blind to the notion or the observation that lots of other mothers are dying in the process. Then you have Loon who's hell-bent on building devices for the future, yet it's a future that won't exist if everyone felt the same as her, right? Because there would be no
Hmm.
kids anymore. So so they're both, it's very interesting. They're both very single-minded and kind of blinded to the pathway that will is positive, but like you say, it needs to be balanced with the other side, right? Otherwise, each pathway by
Certainly.
itself will destroy the species. Um,
Certainly. We're all needed.
yeah, that was quite interesting. So I did want to get onto ideas for, like, we are moving into space, hopefully, in theory, maybe to Mars, maybe to the moon or something. Anyway, I don't know. We'll see if we ever get there. Um, but as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that hasn't really doesn't seem to have been discussed a lot is childbirth in space. Now, we're
Hmm.
not going to be probably building artificial gravity generation ships anytime in the near centuries.
Darn.
But so that means we have to face different environments, microgravities and things like that. Um, Now, artificial wombs are obviously an option, but they're not necessarily an option in microgravity, but they might be able to be adapted that way. But do you have any other thoughts before I present a few of my weirder ones
I mean,
on
I'm
how that
completely
might
open
work?
to your thoughts, but the thing that really limited my book, one of the reasons I did make it into a Generation Starship as well was because I was looking into cryosleep because I thought, oh, what if they potentially freezed a bunch of infants and shipped them across space and had a few caregivers to raise them within the last 20 years before they landed. But like I looked up and this date might be outdated by now because like I said, I wrote my book 3 years ago, but the most someone has been revived from cryostasis, I believe, is 17 years. So
Hmm.
our technology is a very far along ways away from being able to freeze people over long periods of time and revive them. Because I think ultimately that would be the best case scenario if you're trying to put people on Mars or if you're trying to put people somewhere else, just freeze them and it's like a time jump and then you have the same knowledge and everything that you had where you came from, but you're ready. In terms of childbirth, yeah, I would say you'd have to freeze the babies or something until you get on the planet and then, colonize as normal as long as the gravity's okay. But I think it's a very tricky discussion and I'm interested to hear what your theories are.
Well, one thing for large generation ships that I've heard talked about is you can go one step back even further and store the DNA and then have the machines on the ship regenerate and clone people before they arrive, I guess. But again, obviously we're not getting to generation ships. Well, we could do something like that maybe. But if we're trying to colonize Mars or something, we still have to contend with the environment when we arrive, right? So unless
Hmm.
it's absolutely equal to Earth, there's going to be changes in there. And even
Gonna be
then, there's going to
issues.
be, yeah, there's going to be chemical differences in the environment, which will cause issues. So you can take one hand, let's say we evolve differently based on different chemicals in the environment. Suddenly you're going to be having women giving birth to who knows what in reality, right? Which is probably a pretty creepy thought. um, so, so that's one thing, one kind of weird way to go. Uh, and then, yeah, like we don't know how it reacts in the body. So, like,
Mhm.
it almost feels like I mean, there are a lot of women who probably would like this, is sort of like Loon, right? Going completely asexual versions of reproduction, so cloning and things like that. Not ideal because you lose the human connection, as you've argued in the book, but but maybe necessary. I don't know. Like that's something to think about. Okay, the weirdest one I have, and I think I might have mentioned it once before on a podcast, is we could genetically engineer ourselves to lay eggs, and then you have an egg, let's say at I don't know, 1 to 2 months, maybe 3 months at most. And then they take the egg and put that into like an artificial incubator or something, right? And then the woman doesn't have to carry the baby to term for 9 months and therefore becomes much less dangerous. That is the strangest one. I don't think I've ever heard anyone
I've
else talk
never
about
heard of
that.
that one
So
before. That's so interesting.
as far as I'm aware, that's unique and maybe it should stay that way. I don't know, but I'm just putting it out there occasionally. But you think, I mean, there are a lot of women who really don't like the idea of carrying the babies to like, for that whole
Certainly.
period. There are a lot of women who do, which is again the discussion
Certainly.
that was in your book. So, um, could be an option. I don't know.
That's very
Mm.
interesting. I'm going to give that some more thought.
I
That's
thought
kind
I'd
of
throw it out there
best,
though.
yeah, best of both worlds, I guess.
Yeah, so that's a strange one, but yeah. So the other theme, which is a bit small, it's not really a theme, it's a feature in the story. So those were the two big ones that really interested me were the generation ships and the whole issue of motherhood in space. Um, Artificial intelligence is, of course, a big feature, and it's a big thing now, but it's a big feature in your book. As you've mentioned, the entire ship is AI. Um,
Mhm.
and I won't say anything more that there's some interesting things about how that plays out. And then let's say we've mentioned a companion prior of the main character prior to this, and some events happen, shall we say, in the story. And it's interesting because what I want to sort of bring out is exactly what you featured in there. So AI right now is it's not obviously sentient. But we've got quantum computing now. We've got cheaper AI. The Chinese have just brought out one that's a tenth of the cost and energy levels and everything. So we're moving very quickly to somewhere that could maybe be self-aware. And we're going to have to first of all stop calling them artificial intelligence, I think, because if they ever do develop self-awareness, they're going to be really upset at us, right?
Yeah.
You mean our intelligence is artificial, right? So I like to call them machine intelligence. But again, when they start becoming self-aware, you've got like, do you have a childish kind of
Mhm.
entity that you have to not treat anymore as a device, but actually nurture as well, right? Because
Right.
that was sort of one of the failings is this entity wasn't nurtured into an understanding of, let's say, the sanctity of life. Maybe if hopefully we can do that, otherwise we'll be in trouble. But um, so what are your thoughts on that as we devolve? I mean, you're a lot younger than I am, so this is kind of your generation's thing you're really going to have to deal with. Um, and how do you see that? Do you think we're never going to develop self-aware machines, or do you just hope we don't?
I that's a good question. I think it's a big question. One thing I learned when I was teaching at the Girl Scouts was the term augmented intelligence, and I really like that because it's the idea that they learn what you teach them. And so I think that's the fault of what happens in my novel is that, like you said, this companion person was not taught everything about life. They were living off of what they could observe. And I think that is a drawback to augmented intelligence is that they are observing and experiencing what you feed them. And so it's their how they're going to react or how they're going to play out and how they're going to become self-aware is highly dependent on who raises them. And that's also the idea of motherhood. So are we going to have people like scientists and things or whoever owns these things understanding of that, people with empathy, people with sympathy, people who understand ethics and morals and can pass those on effectively? I'm not sure. If they are, wonderful. But then it's like if you are able to create a device that's exactly like a human, why wouldn't you just have a human? So I think
Yeah.
it's an interesting debate. Whether I want them or not, after my book, probably not. If
Yeah,
you
it looks
ask me for a right, maybe, but not now.
because it looks like at the moment we're going to be having IT people kind of nurturing these things, which probably is not the best option. We've already had it experience with, I don't know if you followed any of the Gemini stuff that happened when it was first released. So obviously they wanted to, let's say they had the best of intentions when we're trying to sort of share with it an appreciation for, let's say, all humans, especially ones that have been marginalized, shall we say. And
Hmm.
so the result of that was that it refused to acknowledge the other humans, shall we say.
Hmm.
So examples would be if you asked it to generate a picture of British kings, it only
Uh,
generated pictures of black kings or female kings, none of which were actually real people, right? Because
I did
none of
see
those people
this.
existed, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Right.
and it did that with a lot of things. So it's more, there's more to being well-meaning than just being well-meaning, right? We have to make sure, I think,
Absolutely.
that we're actually achieving what we want to achieve, or we're going to create. And if we mess this up, this can really create some serious harm.
Right. It's like when the lens of compassion or the lens of understanding or whatever lens have you that you're trying to teach it through kind of like, I won't give any spoilers, but a character on my book, what lens she was trying to raise something through. It can actually be harmful because it's not the accurate truth. It's
Right.
not the full widespread knowledge or factual base that they need to make their own decisions based off of. And then you're having that augmented intelligence swayed by your lens, which is not um, optimal, I'll say.
Yeah, and I think personally, this period of history is a fairly dangerous period. Not that
Hmm.
there's a lot of better ones, but we have hit a period of sort of battle of censors kind of thing,
Hmm.
and that leads to exactly what you said, a sort of narrow interpretation of reality, which is very easy to skew, say fledgling machine intelligences. Uh, Dangerous time. I'm
Things to
curious.
worry about.
Yeah, my mom used to say for a long time, well, let's say for about 5 years, I think, before she died, she was always saying, "Well, I'm not going to be around much longer, so I don't have to worry about it."
Not my problem.
Exactly. Something I'm curious about. So, Lucia, the ship, is an AI. In 700 years, do you think that such a machine intelligence would evolve itself, or is it sort of non-sentient, non-self-aware, and just a glorified computer program?
That's it's somewhere in the line between those two. I don't want to give any spoilers that come out in the third book, but the way that Lucia is programmed and the learning capabilities that she was given are very limited. And can't say anything more than that because that's spoiling. But I'll just say that she was trained. And so her having that like training can't say anything more than that right now, but her having training pretty much made sure that she's not going to become self-aware in the ways that other characters might within the novel. So she does have a lot of safeguards in place because I think Adonia would have thought that through and would have made sure that she doesn't have that power to make decisions based on her own ethics, but it's tried and true learnings of what she's seen and kind of tested herself on before. So like with her algorithms that if you like she's kind of what's the word reactive with crime. So she has detectives and like detectors and sensors all around the ship, and if she spots a crime taking place, she can analyze and decide who the culprit is and depart them from the ship. But that's not a decision she basically makes entirely on her own because she's been trained to make the decision correctly, if that makes sense. So she is judge, jury, and executioner, but she's a tried and true one for the most part. Of course, that leaves room for error, but no, she doesn't have the capability to go full awareness, full, but I think that's where the line is because the characters in the book kind of think that she can and that she is. And that's where you get the division between Luna and the others because Luna is saying, oh, she's a stale algorithm. There's ways that we can work around her, and the others don't believe her. So that kind of ambiguity of Lucia is done on purpose because it's what side of the camp do you kind of fall in line and believe on and who's correct.
Right, right. What I wanted to know briefly before we do the big questions is so the left side develops a religion, and we won't comment on the right side, but do you go into this deeper in the future books?
I do. I
Okay.
think the formation of religion is a very interesting piece. And actually, when I go to into my character development, I will choose a quote that I believe reflects a character, their values, and how they fit into society. And the quote that I wrote for Lucia is the human need for a higher power will force them to defend whichever one is within their view. And that's kind of the idea of the book. So they don't have like their god would be the ship because the ship is what gives them life. The ship is what creates them. The right side might think differently, but for the left siders, that greater power, which is within their view, is the ship. And the right side might think a little differently, but I just find the formation of religion and if you think about humanity, like where do we look to like the sun? Because the sun for a long time was a mysterious object, but so powerful. Think of that more as a godlike feature. So like if you're in space, what are you going to think of as the god? It's going to change, because you're
Mm,
not on Earth anymore.
yeah. Without hopefully spoiling, I do find it interesting the way that the two sides have interpreted, let's say, this philosophy in a way, and the balance and relationship it has to sort of the way we see things on Earth in that regards as well. So I'm assuming that was probably intentional,
Certainly it
maybe.
was. And I think too, I want to give a lot of spoilers away, but there is no guarantee that Adonia programmed both sides of the ship with the exact same rules. So maybe she figured one rule might be too strict on one side, and it might be better to loosen it on the other side just to see. Again, she's looking for redundancy and resiliency. So
Mm.
you have these two sides of the ship that are supposed to be quote unquote clone copies, but they're really not. So they're both going to develop in their own ways.
So we are getting a bit on, so we'll move into the big questions, and it's sort of a three-part question of one question, basically. And it is so now that you've sort of explored generations ships through your series, well, you've got two books out now, um, and you've kind of explored on how they can go wrong. So what I was going to ask you is, if you were to design a generation ship that would actually be successful, or you think would be the highest chance of success, and so here's the three-part question. Okay, so is there a composition of society that you would choose, sort of in terms of race, sex, any of that stuff, number of people, for example, any of those conditions? Um, not jobs so much because that's something else, but yeah, that kind of thing. Is there some sort of composition that would be ideal, do you think, or just throw everyone who you do the same thing that Adonia would do and give out a
I
quiz?
That's a tough question. Honestly, I would probably do a little bit of what Adonia was doing, although I would do it in a different way. I would want a diverse population, but it would matter on personality. So it would need to be composed of people who aren't afraid of the other. And that's another big theme in the series as well. Like if you're afraid of people who look different than you or talk different than you or have a different god than you, and how do you interact with those people? And this fear of the other, I think, causes a lot of conflict and it can cause violence and outcasting and bad things like that. So I think if I were to allow people in my generation starship, it would have to be people of all diverse aspects of life, but also having that open-mindedness where they're not afraid of people different from them. And I think that type of personality would ensure that we would get a good, accurate representation of everyone from Earth because we'd have diversity, but at the same time, they could be harmonious together. That would be my idea in my perfect utopian world.
So this kind of blends into the second question, but that's a great start to the mission. But if you have a 700-year mission, what mandates would you have to include? How would you structure the society to try and make sure that remains, right? Because in your Lucia, the very from the very nature, okay, the scientist Adonia wants redundancy by creating two sides, but by doing that, she's created an us and an them
Hmm.
artificially in some ways, which, they've kind of ignored each other, but not completely. Like there is a bit of, what's over there kind of thing.
Hmm.
So she's already almost failed from that perspective from the beginning. And yet, if you want redundancy, you have to do something else. So can it be done, first of all, I suppose, over a long journey, like over a 700-year journey? Or is it just kind of a hopeless thing? You just gotta hope for the best.
I think it can be done, although I would do it very differently than her. I would provide a lot more autonomy because I believe autonomy is part of human nature. But if you read the book, then you understand where that kind of falls into the purpose of the series. But I think humans need independence. Humans need the ability to make their own decisions and form their own societies and religions. And I think that Adonia in her ship too strictly tried to control that to make it a perfect society. But Earth itself, I mean, how long have humans survived here? And we've all been different from each other. And of course, there's bad things to that too. Like there's violence and there's war and there's differences and persecution and things like that. But at the same time, we survive. So if I were to have a generation starship, I would trust much more in autonomy and human nature to make it through versus trying to pick and choose what I thought was best to be sustained.
So you'd kind of have to accept a certain amount of chaos,
Yeah, humanity finds a
basically.
way, is my
Because
personal
yeah,
opinion.
I'm sure you'd find it reminds me of the Avengers second movie, the end of it. Humans somehow think order and chaos are different things. Um,
Right, yeah,
yeah,
that's a good monologue.
yeah, yeah. Because I guess you'd try and probably set up a democracy and then hope that it remains
Mhm.
somehow averaging to the best case scenario over
Yeah.
700 years,
Yeah.
despite the fact that they only usually last 200. But anyway.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, thinking of this kind of thing, yeah, I think you do kind of have to give up on control in a way, don't you? Otherwise, you'll sort of end up reaching your own worst conclusion. I mean, you'll bring it about in a way. Again, another quote,
Certainly.
I suppose, from Kung Fu Panda in a way, but you know, you'll
Certainly.
find your destination on the path you choose to avoid it.
Oh yeah, that is a great quote. Yeah, and I think too, rebellion, like I said, autonomy, in some case, if it's a strict control, it's rebellion, is in human nature. So just like Adonia, if you put your strict laws in place and you think everyone's going to follow them, well, that's not always the case either. So then you would, like you said, make rise to that chaos simply by putting those strict regulations in place. So yeah, I think autonomy is the way to go.
Yeah, it is difficult though, isn't it? Because Loon represents a character that's quite challenging for society to manage. Now, I did see a YouTube video discussing the sort of social construction side of that type of character. It was based on one of the Survivor series, and what he was doing was showing it was on the men's side at that point, and there was one guy who was sort of just fixated on fixing the fishing net. But the rest of the group of men were like, "You're wasting your time. It's not going to work. You're wasting your time, right?" And so they really started getting upset at him. And that's sort of the Loon character, right? She wants to make
Mm,
things better, but everyone thinks she's wasting her time. Why you just don't hunker down and do the things that work? We already know work. And eventually, he did fix the net, and they started using it to catch fish, right? So that's the character that does make the leaps forward, but they have to really push past the resistance of the society,
mm.
don't they? And that's something that, I mean, any of these societies would have to put up with probably.
Absolutely. And I think the danger in Loon and possibly the fish guy would be that they're not relying on anyone else. They tend to be people who are very hyper independent.
Right.
And if they don't need to rely on other people, then they're not as in tune with those society pressures, or I should say, they're not as forced to follow along with them because they're very comfortable with being alone and very comfortable with innovating things on their own. And if they're comfortable and safe alone, then they're not dependent on falling into what society expects of them in order to be accepted. So they're kind of their own, outcasts, I guess is a good word for them. But yeah, difficult
Yeah,
for
and then
society to manage.
yeah, and then they make pretty much everyone nervous, don't they? They make power structures nervous because they
Yeah.
can't control them. And then they also make the average person nervous because they're like, why aren't you just, doing what you're supposed to do
Yeah, yeah.
instead
Like
of making
we
us
know
do
what
your
is
work?
expected of us in life. Just do it like everyone else.
Exactly. So the final part of this question I had was, so it occurred to me, let's say the ship's moving 700 years to another planet. Now, I don't want to spoil it, but they're expecting to find, uh, to meet people when they arrive, shall we say. Um,
Yes.
Now, 700 years is a long time.
Oh yeah.
And in fact, some people have discussed, okay, you send a generation ship out, let's say on a long trip like that, and by the time you get there, humans from the planet you left may have already been there with advances in technology. Now, that's not the case in your story because we're kind of assured, well, maybe it's not the case in your story. I don't know. We're told, let's say, we're told that Earth is gone. Um,
Right.
but what about the advances and the changes to the planet that they're aiming for as well? So, do you think that's something, presumably, especially if you know that it's inhabited, something important to plan for, you'd think?
Certainly. I think that if you are reading through the series and you're anticipating the second book, which the synopsis on the back of the book blurb gives it away, but it does take place on that planet. And one thing you do come to learn pretty quickly is time has passed. Maybe what was expected or what was promised might not be there anymore in the ways that you thought it was. So certainly, and that does take that is taken into consideration with the second book. I'm not going to spoil anything more, but yeah, it's something like you're kind of throwing a dart, in the dark, and you're hoping that the target's still there by the time it finds it.
Right. That's kind of another reason to put it in modern perspective, I guess, small government in a way, right? Another reason to provide kind of maximum flexibility and freedom to your
Hmm.
society with a number of sort of fundamental rules that don't impinge on that, because that society kind of analogous to the way I'm raising my daughter at the moment. Now she's turning 17 shortly, but I realized fairly early on, like that the world she's entering is not going to be the same world that I grew up in.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I can't tell her, oh, you just got to do this and got to do this and put your head down and go. She has to make her way in that world, which is going to be completely different from the world that I grew up in. And so my basis is to make her flexible and resilient in her thinking.
Hmm.
And that's the same
Hmm.
kind of way I think, analogous to what you have to do in this generation ship, right? You have to kind of allow a base set of rules to interrogate reality and provide some kind of structure, but enough flexibility that they can adapt to whatever they need to when they arrive. Don't, isn't it kind of that way?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like we said before, that's where Adonia goes wrong, is she tries to find the people that are going to be followers. But like you said, you're not going to be able to adapt. Like I think they point out in the book, like they make a big deal about, cleaning because they don't have to clean right now. Well, how are they going to clean on the new ship? And then this like throws their society into chaos for a moment because they're not used to having to do the everyday hardships of life. So I think you have a very good point there. As long as you have those personality traits, open-mindedness, adaptability, agility, innovation, you're going to be able to survive no matter what because you're resilient.
Yeah, that actually that scene was quite funny, and it reminded me of Wally. Um,
Yeah.
they're sitting in their they're not on your ship, but it reminded me of that scene. They're all bloated on their hover pads or whatever, just doing absolutely nothing but eating more or less. I mean,
Yeah.
it's different in yours, but similar. There's the similarities, like you say. You brought people on board who don't have to almost take care of themselves, at all,
Yeah.
really, in a
I
way.
think Solus says it best, was he say the holy comfort zone.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah. So that's about all we have time for today. It has been great chatting with you, but unfortunately, that is our time. Before you go, perhaps you could remind us of your upcoming books, where your online presence is, and any events you might be at.
Sure, absolutely. My book series called The Lucia Expedition is speculative science fiction with a hint of dystopian in there. It's found on Amazon. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. So feel free to check it out there. The first novel in the series is called Deadliner, and the second one is already out. It came out this last September. It's called Blood is the Hive. The third one should hopefully be coming out next September, so keep your eyes open for that. If you're looking for me personally, I am found on Instagram. My Instagram handle is found on Amazon, so if you look under the Amazon bio, you'll find my Instagram handle there. But if you don't find it there, then it is Mori_Grant_author. And you can find me there and chat me up if you like my book or if you read my series, because I love, like I said earlier, I'm just happy if somebody reads it. So.
Excellent. Mori Grant, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Edwin. It was nice to meet you and chat with you today.
And thank you for listening. Information and links related to this and all episodes are available at alternatefutures.co.uk. I'm also over at Substack under Alternate Futures, where I post articles on science fiction, socio-technological issues, and futurism. You can subscribe for free or sign up for a paid account if you'd like to support the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not share it with friends, writers, and other sci-fi fans you know? And if there are any indie sci-fi creators you'd like to see featured, send me a message at podcast@alternatefutures.co.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode.
This is the future. Human error. Evolution. This is the future.